Hello, I'm Liam and welcome to my February update on growing green manures. It's been a number of weeks since I made the last video. I made my last video in early December and 2 months have passed because now it's nearly the end of February. And a lot has changed over the last few weeks. It's not only been over 2 months since I made the last video, for several weeks I haven't come down to the plot. And when I did come down here a few days ago, I was really shocked and surprised by what I saw. The green manures have really changed quite considerably over that time. When I first saw the beds, I thought several of the green manures I'd grown had failed, but thinking about it, I'm actually really pleased with the results. And I'll explain more when I show the beds. But before showing the beds, I think it's helpful to recap just why I decided to grow green manures in the first place. There are many good reasons for growing green manures, but my 3 main reasons were as follows. Firstly, I wanted to protect the beds at the end of the growing season. A common way of doing this is to cover the beds with ground cover fabric, or perhaps a really thick mulch of well-rotted manure. The reason for doing this is that heavy rain over the winter months can leach nutrients out of the soil, and these nutrients are really important for plant growth. And really thick mulch also helps to feed the soil. But the disadvantage of using a thick mulch is that it's a lot of work wheelbarrowing well-rotted manure to the plot and around onto the beds. Transporting seed down to the plot is much easier. And for many of the green manures, all it needed was to be surface sowed and then raked over. I've also touched on the second reason why I wanted to grow green manures, and that was to add nutrients into the soil. Now there are 2 types of green manures, those that lift nutrients out of the soil and store it in the plant mass. At the end of the growing cycle, the plants are cut down and the nutrients slowly return back into the soil, ready to help the growth of future crops. These types of green manure don't add nutrients to the soil, but they really help to keep the beds in good condition. Then there are the second type of green manures that are more additive, that actually add nutrients to the soil. These are typically clovers, peas and beans, which are able to take nitrogen from the air, fix it in their roots, and eventually this nitrogen will return to the soil and be usable by plants. And my third test for green manures was how easy it would be to use the beds in the spring. My worry was that if the beds were covered in the plant growth of the green manures, it would actually be a lot of work to return the beds to be usable for sowing. And as it's turned out, for all but one of my green manures, this won't be a problem. And having given that introduction, I think now's a good time to start looking at the beds. One final thing is that I regularly post videos on YouTube about growing fruit, vegetables and herbs. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to the channel. Also, you may want to look at my website, allotmentbook.co.uk. So let's take a look at the beds now. Starting with the grazing rye, it should be possible to see that the bed is in really good condition. Grazing rye, as the name suggests, is often grown for animal feed. And perhaps it's no surprise that it's grown really strongly and really hasn't been affected by the frost at all. Now, as I said earlier, one of my main concerns with growing green manure would be how hard it would be to incorporate the green manure back in the soil in the spring. And this is the only crop where potentially that is an issue. Now, I do have a couple of alternatives. One is to use a grass trimmer to cut the grazing rye right back down to ground level and then cover it with ground cover fabric. I do have some biodegradable ground cover fabric left over. Or perhaps use a no-dig method of covering the bed with cardboard and then putting some compost on top. Alternatively, I could cut the grazing rye right back and turn the soil over using a spade. That does have the disadvantage of disturbing the soil, the microorganisms living in the soil, and also because the soil is disturbed, there's also the possibility that heavy rain will leach nutrients out of the soil. I think I'm going to try cutting the grazing rye right back and covering it, and hopefully that will be successful, and then only falling back to turning the soil over if I can't stop the plant growth. One final thing to say about grazing rye is that it's a lifting type of green manure. It's simply storing nutrients in the plant growth, and these need to be returned to the soil through decomposition for the green manures to be effective. In this bed here, I grew a green manure mix, which is a mix of mustard seed, ryegrass, which is different to grazing rye, it's a smaller plant, and some clover. Now, in earlier videos, I showed how the mustard seed dominated. The mustard grew almost to this height, almost 1 metre in height. But what's happened due to the really severe frosts over the last couple of months is that the mustard plants have simply died back, and all the goodness contained in the plants hopefully has been returned to the soil. And what remains really is the ryegrass, and there are patches with clover, but really not much clover to be seen at all. It's mainly ryegrass. What I was really surprised about is how quickly this bed has changed. Only a couple of months ago, the mustard plants were really large, and now there's almost no evidence of them at all. But the roots are still likely to be holding the soil in place, and the ryegrass especially is doing that job. Looking at this bed, compared to my grazing rye next to it, the bed looks much closer to being usable. Again, I'm probably going to scrim the plants down to return the nutrients to the soil, but I'm more confident with this bed that if I simply cover it with a ground cover fabric and a thick mulch, that the bed will soon be usable. Similar to the grazing rye, the mustard and the ryegrass grown in this bed are nitrogen lifting, not adding nutrients to the soil. But the mix did contain clover, which has the potential to be nitrogen fixing. But I said, looking at the bed, there doesn't appear to be much clover growth here. So what I'm thinking of doing is to spread some well-rotted manure over the bed to help feed it. In this bed here, I grew Phacelia tanacetifolia, or Phacelia for short. And as you can see, there's almost no trace of it. I was really surprised when I saw this a few days ago. I couldn't understand what had happened. I even thought maybe some animal had come down and eaten the crop. But on closer inspection, I think what's happened is decomposition. The really hard frosts in December have clearly killed the plants. The leaf mass fell onto the beds, and then through decomposition, all the nutrients contained in the Phacelia has returned to the soil. As with my green manure mix and the grazing rye, Phacelia is a nitrogen lifting crop. But I think compared to the other two crops I've shown, it hasn't been as good at protecting the soil. Now the soil is almost bare. And if there is heavy rain, there is the potential, as I said earlier, for the nutrients to be washed out. But what I have learned about Phacelia is that apart from it being frost sensitive, is that it's extremely fast growing. And therefore it's good to provide coverage on a bed if it's going to be laying dormant for a couple of months, perhaps in August and September time. I think in a previous video I said I was worried about the Phacelia potentially coming into flower and then the seed dispersing over the plot. But as it's turned out, that's clearly not a problem. In this bed here, I have my red clover, and this is the first of my nitrogen fixing type of green manures. One noticeable thing is that the bed is green, and I think the second noticeable thing is that the red clover itself is so low growing. It's barely 2 inches in height. Compared to the other types of green manure, it did grow much less strongly, but it has been frost hardy and it is protecting the soil. And because it's clover, it is nitrogen fixing, so it's actually adding nutrients back into the soil. Now, when I look at the bed, I can see some weeds growing too. And that's one of the disadvantages, I think, of growing the clover, is that it does provide the opportunity for weeds to grow. On the other hand, I think that's potentially one of its strengths. And the reason I say that is that what I'm thinking of doing is to sow clover with taller plants growing through it. And what I think will happen then is that the red clover will do its work of fixing nitrogen into the soil and will also help prevent the soil drying out in really hot weather. And the plants growing through it will benefit from the nutrient and also the cooler, more moist soil. A couple of crops I'm thinking of experimenting with is garlic. And because garlic grows tall and doesn't have wide leaf mass, there's a lot of exposed soil. And that's why I'm interested in growing red clover between it, because it'll help cover the soil. Also, any tall growing plants like sunflowers or runner beans or French beans, I think growing red clover around them will also work well. And these are my field beans. As with the red clover mix, field beans are nitrogen fixing. At the time of the last video, I was really pleased with how the bed was looking. And just after I made that video, there was a really hard frost, and that did for the plants. The plants did grow really, really strongly. And although the tops have fully decomposed back into the soil, and all that remains are the stalks of the plants poking up through, I'm confident that due to the strong growth of the plants, that nitrogen has been fixed back into the soil, which will really help future crops. And because of the strong growth, it provided much less opportunity for weeds to grow. Yes, there are a few weeds growing in the bed, but a lot less than are growing in the red clover bed. So overall, I am really pleased with the experiment in growing field beans, although the plants clearly are frost sensitive. What I'm going to do is to use a grass trimmer to cut the stalks back, and then I think the bed will be ready for planting. And I'm certainly not going to dig over the bed prior to planting. I may use this bed for growing onions or perhaps courgette and squash, and I'm hoping the crops will really benefit from the nutrients that have been added back into the soil. And that's it, that's the end of this update on growing green manures. If I was to sum up what I've learned so far, I've been really impressed with the grazing rye. It's clearly a strong grower, and I think if I had a bed that needed ground cover for a long period of time, through both winter and summer months, I think it's an ideal crop to grow because it provides excellent ground cover. Although I think there is more work to do to return the bed to be usable for growing crops. And by that I mean cutting it back and clearing the bed so I can sow new seed in it. I'm also interested in growing again the red clover because it is low growing and it does add nutrients into the soil. I think it's an ideal companion crop to grow between other plants. But I think the green manure that I've been most impressed with has been the field beans, because it combines being nitrogen fixing and growing really strongly, providing excellent ground cover. Added to that, because the plants grow from a single stem, it's really easy to cut back. Over future videos, I hope to show how I use the beds. And if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button or leaving a comment. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to the YouTube channel in the usual way.